All Saints and the Return of Sade, latest with Jules Holland in half an hour. First, the psychology of making cinema, now on BBC Two. And if you're going to make it big.
A group of doctors were sent to a village to show a film about a disease. And the disease was brought by a fly. And the film was a short film, a documentary about the dangers of these flies and how to be careful, how to avoid them. So all the villages were, in a theater. And in the film, of course, there were some close-ups of the fly. So at the end, the farmers said, "Why did you show us this film? It doesn't concern us at all." Yes, it does concern. It's about a disease. It's just for you to protect, to avoid. No. The villagers say, it's not for us. We have never had flies that size in our country. Never.
The villagers take it for granted that film will give a faithful account of the world. Whereas filmmakers know that, on screen, size is always magically flexible.
This is a programme about why size matters so much to cinema. It's about the way the camera can take a trivial object and make it loom so large that we can think of little else. But it's also about cinema's irrepressible desire to show the audience something bigger than it's ever seen before, to overwhelm them with sheer scale.
Which is bigger, an alien spaceship which overshadows a whole city, or a simple glass of water? When you're watching a film, you might need to think twice. The ripples on that glass of water are as big, in their way, as anything Spielberg shows us in Jurassic Park. And they illustrate an odd dilemma for any director who wants to impress the audience. Because the camera can achieve immensity in two entirely contradictory ways. It can shrink the very large until it fits within the screen, or it can expand something small until it overflows its boundaries.
It's one of the problems with cinema, and this eternal question of is cinema truthful? It's one of the problems with cinema, of course it isn't truthful because, we're 20, 30 feet larger than what we are. And when we go to the cinema, do we just want to see a 20, 30 foot enlargement of what we do every day? Frankly, no. We want to see what we do every day made 20 or 30 times larger.
Directors quickly recognised that magnitude was one of cinema's hottest effects. But their first instinct was to film big things rather than film things big. And 50 years later, when the arrival of CinemaScope threatened directors with a kind of collective agoraphobia, the instinct remained exactly the same.
They mainly reacted out of size with the sense we're going to fill the screen with stuff, and the stuff we're going to fill it with has to be big-time stuff, historical, world-shaking events, the fall of the Roman Empire, Samson bringing the temple down about his ears, Christianity being born and taking over the world. They were nearly all ancient world epics.
You know why Luft magazine has said, Quo Vadis is the most colossal movie ever made, and why Life magazine has said, the most genuinely colossal movie you are likely to see for the rest of your lives.
Years before, D.W. Griffith had shown that even something as large as an elephant could be dwarfed by the right setting.
He really did build a big mother of a set, and he really worked that set. So that, when you went to that movie, you really said, wow, that's some artifice that's been constructed there.
Unfortunately, artifice was sometimes exactly what it looked like. If you got close enough to see human faces, then the sets effectively disappeared. And if you pulled back far enough to see the sets, then the people disappeared, and all secure sense of scale with it. Was this real, or just a model. The title cards for Intolerance, boasting about the film's dimensions, betray a tremor of nerves that moviegoers might not be as impressed as they should. The problem with the epic was what it did to the actors. When Douglas Fairbanks first saw the vast set for his film Robin Hood, his pleasure at the sight soon turned to anxiety. He was the biggest star in Hollywood at the time, but no one could be bigger than that.
He saw these huge things sticking up in the air, the sets. He said, "What in the world is that?" We said, "Those are your sets for Robin Hood." Well, he got as far as the gate of the studio, and he took a look in through the gate at these big sets. And he backed the car off and said, "Take me home." He said, "You can forget it." He said, "I wouldn't go near those damn things, those big sets." He said, "What would I do? I'm a personality actor. People want me for my smile, for what I do, my personality, not for those big things. They swamp me."
Fairbanks was eventually won over, but he had to work very hard to make his presence felt in those wide-open spaces. The paradox seemed intractable. Give the audience the biggest thing it had ever seen, and then everything they truly cared about shrank until it was almost invisible. Griffith found one of the best solutions to the conundrum, using the camera itself to pace out the enormity of his set, from panorama to individual figures. Time measures out the distance that has to be travelled from the epic to the personal, and every second of this slow advance makes the scene swell in grandeur. And the technique works just as well in contemporary films. In Blade Runner, Ridley Scott does something almost identical, pressing into his cityscape until, at the very end of the camera's long track, we finally glimpse the tiny figure who lets us take a measure of that colossal architecture.
Next subject, Kowalski Leon. Engineer waste disposal. File section, new employee.
Something else is happening here too, because as soon as the edges of those buildings pass beyond the edge of the screen, we can no longer grasp them at a single glance. And that had been a dependable recipe for awe long before cinema was invented. In his essay on the sublime, Edmund Burke wrote that hardly anything can strike the mind with its greatness which does not make some approach towards infinity, which nothing can do whilst we are able to perceive its bounds. It was a truth exploited by a sequence that would probably figure in most moviegoers' top 10 of cinematic immensity, the opening scene of Star Wars.
That opening of Star Wars, I just sat in the theater and went, "Oh my God, this is wonderful." I mean, he's done two things. They've taken your eye with the crawl away. So your eye is going away from this whole thing to a point, a tiny point out there. And I think it's focused your eye in the center of the screen. This is all peripheral now. And then a point comes in from the top. And the great thing about that ship is triangular. So it starts at a small point, and you think, "Oh, that's it." And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And from that moment on, I was like, "Oh my God, this is the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life." And I think it was brilliant.
The only problem with Lucas's wonderful shot is that it's doomed to anticlimax. The minute you see the whole ship, it seems to shrink within the frame, and it's not just because it's moving away from you. Move the camera towards an object, and the risk of diminution is much reduced. But that steadily advancing motion does something else too. It promises a different kind of enlargement altogether.
The logic of discovery in films. When the camera moves towards something, when we go inside from outside, through the window, through the door, and things get closer and things get bigger, close up to the face, the logic is always one of, now we're getting much closer to the deep truth. The truth is hidden and it's deep and it's close and it's way inside there, and the deeper inside we get, the closer we're going to get to the truth.
The camera is a marvelous instrument almost a scientific instrument, not only for bringing us close to someone or something, but presumably for revealing the truth. Closer is better. We can inspect something from close distance. That means we know more about it. That's not always the case. I think sometimes when the camera comes close to something, it mystifies it. We see it in a way that we've never seen it before. We see all sorts of odd proportions. I think the classic example of a film that suggests that closer is not necessarily more and more truthful is Antonioni's Blow Up. As the camera moves closer and closer, purporting to find out the truth, maybe it does or maybe it doesn't, because at long shot we don't see anything. At closer shot, we think we see a murder. But at even closer shot, as the negative gets expanded, until we see not so much the contours of reality, but I think what Antonioni might call the molecules of reality, the atomic particles of reality, all of a sudden we dip into a world of chaos, and it's very startling and very disordering, and it's something that suits Antonioni's philosophy.
Antonioni swims against the current, though. Almost always, the enlargement of objects on screen suggests an enlargement of understanding, an approach to truths which may be invisible from further off. At the beginning of Blue Velvet, David Lynch pushes his camera into a manicured lawn to reveal what seethes and scurries below. It's an image of what lies beneath the superficial serenity of suburban life. This instinct to magnify and reveal is at the heart of cinema, but it needed alibis when it was first indulged. Some of the earliest close-ups appear in films in which a magnifying lens is shown on screen, as if the audience needed an explanation for that sudden change in scale.
I remember when I was doing this program about early cinema, and I saw the first close-up. There was a scene which was... it was also the first use of a telephone in a film, and there was a burglar breaking into a house, and the mother and child were in there, and in fact they were going to have to use the telephone to call the father to come back and save. It's all shot in the wide proscenium stage way of shooting, and they cut to the first close-up, and it just almost blew me out of my chair. It was so powerful.
Initially, the close-up is simply a spectacular novelty, but it soon acquires argumentative force. When Eisenstein offers a close-up of maggot-infested meat in Battleship Potemkin, he sets the officer's shameless denial against the evidence of our own eyes. The glasses make it clear that there can be no misunderstanding. The close-up frees itself from such devices very quickly, moving away from an idea of scientific scrutiny to something far more poetic. In Intolerance, Griffith showed how a detail could distill the emotion of a scene. When the social workers unjustly tear a child from its mother, it's not the actress's face that is most expressive, but her hand. What Griffith had understood was that the close-up restored power to the director and took it away from the viewer.
Disant ça, c'est que quand un plan est large, le spectateur peut regarder il a beaucoup de choses à regarder dans ce plan. Et le regard du spectateur est un regard presque libre, parce qu'il peut regarder le paysage qui est au fond, la couleur de la moquette, les gens qui se rencontrent, s'ils sont trois dans le champ, etc. En revanche, quand d'un seul coup vous décidez de faire un gros plan, un insert très gros comme ça, c'est vous qui reprenez un petit peu du pouvoir sur le regard du spectateur, c'est vous qui obligez le spectateur à voir cette chose-là, ce détail. Et c'est à ce moment-là que le gros plan est passionnant, parce que il est vraiment l'expression du point de vue de la réalisation.
And the close-up doesn't just give directors power over us. It greatly expands their control over actors too.
Orson Welles had a joke about close-ups, which he evidently threw at his cast all through Citizen Kane and Magnificent Ambersons, his two first films. he said, now you better do this right, you know, because if you're not very careful, we may have to use a close-up. In other words, it was a threat of something negative. The less experienced the actor, the more you can control him in a close-up. Consequently, because Cher wasn't very experienced, there's an inordinate number of close-ups in Mask of her. Why? Because it's easy to stand back behind the camera and talk somebody through a close-up. Look down, look up, look down again. Good, do it one more time, a little faster. Look down, look up, look up. I can do a lot of things in a close-up because you don't see me, you don't see anything, just the person. Look straight ahead, over there, hold the look, hold the look. Now look down for, just hold the look, now look up again. Now that, when you transfer that to the screen, that could be a very contemplative, moving look. And all it is, the director standing backstage saying, look down, look up.
It's not very surprising that the human face should exercise such fascination for directors. Of all the objects that can appear on a screen, this one has the largest gravitational pull, greedily consuming the attention of the camera. And size was, after all, the essence of stardom. Hollywood was where people went to make it big, and the industry created a novel kind of colossus, one which towered over the little people in the street, but which remained humanly vulnerable. The camera magnified these stars, but it also exposed them.
We could have a house with trees and a yard. You might even have a dog.
When I saw my face, and it was the whole screen, it was overwhelming. Fortunately, it didn't hit me wrong, because some people do that, I've been told, and what happens is they say, oh my God, and they become so self-conscious then that when they do a close-up that they remember and they're thinking, oh my God, it's 40 feet tall or something, and I wonder if my eye is twitching or I had very good advice, and it didn't affect me that way, but I can see where it would.
It's such an unusual and almost effortless way to get access to someone's interior landscape. And it is the absolute gift of cinema that you could spend millions of dollars on crowd scenes and like special effects, but there is nothing more mysterious than a full face on screen and the unworldly effect of interacting with that, because it's so outside of our life. Even being close to a lover's face doesn't really give us what a close-up will.
I think the variance of distance between the camera and the subject being filmed helps create a variety of emotional effects in the spectator. And the one thing that I notice in particular is when the camera moves in close and we become more sympathetic or attached, it moves in a little bit closer, we become perhaps more emotionally involved, and then at a certain point it gets too close and it breaches that personal boundary or whatever you want to call it, and maybe makes us a little nervous or injects a little element of disturbance into that.
The close-up doesn't just allow us to stare deep into the eyes of an actor or an actress and to feel their breath on our lips. It also allows the face to transcend its own humanity. Detached from the body, it becomes a mask of something larger than any mere individual.
The most masterful use of the close-up, and one that's a kind of supreme example of its purpose and fulfillment, is in a film by Carl Dreyer called The Passion of Joan of Arc, made in 1927. It helps to create the sort of abstracted, sacred quality picture by lifting it above the physicality of the body into the visible seat of the soul, the faith.
A close-up allows us to abstract a moment through magnification, and you can heighten things and replicate the sense that something has transformed from the everyday into the extraordinary by that magnification. And so when trying to express feelings of intense emotion, a close-up can replicate very often the feeling that we would experience or that we associate with that emotion.
The secret to this wonderful trick is not so much magnification as a kind of distillation. The camera concentrates for us, excluding all distractions, so that we can see the textures of the world lifted free from their mundane locations, or see the most banal objects transformed into actors.
There's this great Japanese filmmaker called Ozu, who almost brings to life inanimate objects by isolating them. I know that Scorsese used Ozu technique in Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver is virtually an homage to Ozu. There's the great moment where De Niro is sitting in a cafeteria and he's having a cup of coffee, and the camera goes from him and moves right past the cup, which is one of the most profound uses of the concept of schizophrenia that I've ever seen. The way the schizophrenic sees is, instead of looking at, let's say I'm on camera now, the schizophrenic would maybe see a close-up detail of my glasses and not my face, or this button over here. In other words, if I'm looking at you and I'm into advanced schizophrenia, I'm not seeing you as a person. I'm seeing a detail on your shirt. So cinema has power to convey that sort of thing in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing.
A close-up like that always asks a question of the audience. Why should that apparently humble object exert such power over the camera? But not all close-ups interrogate our imaginations in the same way. In classical Hollywood film, the extreme close-up, or the insert as it was known, often supplied an answer to a question raised by a previous shot. What's he getting out of the drawer? What's written on the card? Shots like that allowed the audience to read the small print of a film's plot, and so mechanically functional were they that they were often subcontracted out to a separate department to film.
You don't smoke, do you?
No, I don't.
Oh, thank heavens for that.
In Hitchcock's Suspicion, we need to know that Cary Grant is the kind of man who will cheat on a train fare, let alone a woman. But the words written on his ticket and that of Joan Fontaine's also alert us to their very different worth as people.
Thank you, miss. I'm afraid you're in the wrong compartment, sir.
It's a first-class compartment, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Well, then I'm all right.
This is a third-class ticket, sir.
So what sort of line is this, selling third-class tickets at first-class prices?
I'm very sorry, sir.
It's easy to miss Hitchcock's insinuation there. Much harder in one of his most wonderfully gratuitous inserts, one that has no obvious narrative function to perform.
I still think my way was best.
That shot probably isn't more than 15 frames long. But I mean, it's an absolutely, brilliant analogy to female genitalia, and the snap of it is wonderful. I mean, he's not getting anywhere near her.
Part of Hitchcock's genius lies in his ability to plunder the world for such expressive objects. But the talent isn't his alone.
C'est vrai que dans les scènes de film, j'ai toujours du plaisir à d'un seul coup montrer des choses qu'on n'est pas obligé de montrer, mais qui évoquent beaucoup. Et quand Judith Godrèche fait traîner sa robe dans le pollen des fleurs, on n'avait pas besoin de montrer ça vraiment. Mais en fait, ce qui m'intéressait, c'était de montrer là, effectivement, deux choses. Une première chose, c'était tout simplement le bas de la robe qui traîne sur les fleurs pour se charger de pollen. Et d'un autre côté, et là ça va vous faire hurler, mais ça m'est égal, je me suis dit, je vais adopter le point de vue de la robe. Il y a plus d'audace dans l'utilisation d'un gros plan que dans l'utilisation d'un plan large. C'est l'audace d'insister précisément sur telle chose.
There's a sensuous pleasure to all close-ups, a real delight at seeing the world from a different angle. But the best close-ups are always an idea, not just a feeling. The pool balls in Scorsese's Colour of Money move with the ponderous gravity of planets, as if the weight of everything that orbited around them, money, pride, happiness, had been concentrated inside those shining surfaces.
This is a sequence of shots that Scorsese had storyboarded, but knew there was no way that an ordinary camera crew could get, because you had to use special macro photography lenses and speeds, incredibly high speeds, that would be impossible to get on a normal set. You'll see, I'm just going to go frame by frame here, that because he's shooting at such a high speed, when you project it normally, you get this wonderful feeling of the chalk flying off the stick.
The close-up can feel so much like a gift to our eyes that it's easy to forget that it's always a matter of taking things away from us too, excluding everything from the screen except what the director wants us to look at. In Tirer sur la pianiste, when Charles Aznavour hesitates before pressing the bell of the concert agent who will transform his career, the extreme close-up of his finger gives genuine weight to the moment of decision. It shows how huge that tiny movement truly is. Close-ups play with our eyes and our minds. By making things big, cinema can make them speak volumes. And when it does that, it makes innocents of us all.
More next Saturday at the earlier time of 10:35. Later with Jules Holland is next tonight on BBC Two with All Saints, Sade and Taj Mahal.